Welcome to Nebraskanomics, where we help Nebraskans remove barriers to opportunity with policy research and legislative advice. I'm your host, Jim Vokal, CEO of the Platte Institute, a Nebraska-based think tank promoting policies that make it easier to get a good job, start a business, and help Nebraskans keep more of what they earn. If you want more economic freedom in Nebraska, then let's get started. Welcome to this edition of Nebraskanomics. I'm Jim Vokal, your host, and today I'm joined by my peer in Iowa, Chris Ingstad. Chris is the president of Iowans for Tax Relief Foundation. Chris, thanks for coming back on Nebraskanomics.
Thank you for inviting me, Jim. It is good to be back with you all.
All right, so there is a competitive landscape between Nebraska and Iowa. I'm super competitive. We're competitive from a football standpoint. You guys are a rival. You seem to always beat us, but you're also beating us on the tax reform standpoint as well. And I want to just, for our listeners' benefit, remind them that you recently repealed the state inheritance tax, now leaving Nebraska as one of 5 states that still has that nasty tax on the books. Prior to Nebraska passing its income tax reforms, Iowa brought their rate down to 3.9%. Is that correct?
3.8.
3.8. I apologize. Yeah. And it just seems like the foot continues to be on the pedal in Iowa. And I'm having you on today because your session just got over with and your team helped champion a pretty decent property tax package in Iowa. So let's just dive right into the details here. It was a comprehensive package. Why don't you describe for our listeners what some of the specifics of the reforms were?
Yep, be glad to. And you're right about the competitiveness. It's not just between me and you as we touch base on these things and stay in touch. It is between the governors. It is between the football fans. It's between everything. And I think that ultimately is better, though. That helps all of us, right? It's also helpful to have a trusted colleague like you and your team at Platte that we can compare some notes with and do a reasonableness check and just see, right? That's super helpful for us. But yeah, they passed a comprehensive reform. There are a lot of different, frankly, taxpayer protections that they put in this. The foundation of it was a 2% growth cap, a 2% cap on the growth of property taxes for cities and counties. There are a few exceptions, but broadly speaking, the property tax revenue for cities and counties can't grow more than 2%. Now, if there's new development, new neighborhoods, new business districts go up, that comes on. That's not subject to the cap. Nobody's being penalized for growth. And we think that's really important, that over the long term, that will bend down the cost curve. We all are used to getting that property tax bill in the mail and saying, my goodness, how did it go up so much? This should make a big dent on the ability of that to go up. But they did some other things. Yeah.
Well, let's just stop right there because I want to remind our listeners a couple things. As I stress that property taxes are the result of spending. And I want to remind our listeners that the property tax caps that were passed in a special session a few years ago back in Nebraska aren't really great. They're based for cities and counties on a national average of spending growth. And so if California and New York are spending double digits, that's going to affect the rate of growth that is allowed here in Nebraska. And I think we look back in the past and that number in Nebraska, that cap could be as high as 6% from what I've seen in past stuff. So that 2% that you just mentioned is meaningful in comparison to Nebraska.
It is. And again, we think it'll be a good taxpayer protection. There's no reason we should peg, our Midwestern finances to what they choose to do on the coasts. And so we think that that's really helpful. And let's be honest, a 2% growth cap, Jim, almost guarantees local government budgets will be able to grow, right? As much as we'd like to figure out a way to eliminate property taxes or really pull it back, any claims from local governments that would be massive cuts, those just don't hold up. We are still going to grow, and we think 2% is a reasonable number. And so that's going to be in place. In addition to that, they did redo the school finance formula. The state general fund will be taking on a little bit more money, meaning property taxes will support a little bit less of that, but the schools will still be made whole from that. There's no real cut there. It's just who's paying for it. Importantly, there were some guardrails put around TIF, tax increment financing, and other incentive plans that we think is a long-term win for the taxpayer. So cities and counties can't just hand out money to developers in major ways, at least with not some without some guardrails. And then Jim, one thing that was underreported, and I think will make a big difference, is local governments in Iowa are going to have basically a 35% cap on their ending fund balance. This is the money this is the over collection of taxes, Jim. After they've taken it from the taxpayer, after they've paid for all of their expenses, after they've funded their capital projects, cities and counties have a bucket of money that is completely like unassigned and unencumbered. And some of them, Jim, are stacking up. Just they're getting huge buckets of it. There's a community right down the interstate from where we are that has 200% of their annual operating expenses just sitting on the sidelines like that. And so all this really is a big over collection of property taxes. And so the state coming in and saying, you can't let that grow that much means they can't keep soaking the taxpayer. They will not just have that blank check and the ability to stockpile that cash. Again, that's been kind of underreported. It's harder to explain, but those sort of technical fixes, we think as an organization, will go a long way to protecting the tax.
Absolutely. And I know people get frustrated in Nebraska because they want to see their property tax liability goes down. But this 2% cap that you're talking about and some of the things that we got passed in Nebraska with LB 803, people get frustrated. We're controlling the growth of property taxes. And that's just as important as actually reducing the property tax liability, because as you well know, watching Iowa local government, and we're watching it here, valuations go up and they're just spending the windfalls.
That's right. And again, this does not sort of account for the valuations. In other words, it will not let them have that automatic windfall from those valuation increases. Look, we should, as homeowners, as property owners, we should be happy when valuations go up. But too many of us have just gotten conditioned, and we see that valuation go up. We know there's likely a big property tax increase coming along with it. So these sorts of caps are super, super valuable. Look, tax relief is in the name of our organization. We'd love to get rid of all the taxes. We'd love to cut them in a major way. And we'll keep working to do that sort of thing. But why don't we just start by slowing down the growth, finding some more reasonable level for both us and the governments that those taxes fund?
So you talked a little bit, what I would imagine how you frame the debate in your role. How else did your organization frame the debate? What talking points? How did you convince lawmakers to pass this and that this was good policy?
I mean, first of all, it's a good case study on what a think tank or an organization like ITR or Platte can do, right? There's a lot of different levers that we can pull to both demonstrate what a good policy solution would be, but then also to sort of convince people to show them what's possible and why it's good. Jim, it started with polling, as if any of us really need a scientific poll to show that folks are frustrated with property taxes. But that's really important, right? It's research that shows the growth of property taxes has far exceeded, a combination of like inflation and population growth, right? We demonstrate the problem, we demonstrate the need, and then we talk about a solution, right? And we talked about things to do and things not to do. Look, there was a push to have revenue enhancements or new revenue streams. And we did our best to make sure that we weren't going to trade one set of taxes for another. Look, sometimes these trade-offs or these deals have to be made, and that's okay. But our default position could not be cut this tax by raising this one over here. Again, let the conversations go on and wherever they may land. But some of it was training legislators that at some point, you've got to pick a side. You can be on the side of the voter, of the taxpayer, the citizen, or you can be on the side of local governments. Who do you want to prioritize? But that word prioritize or priorities was really the heart of this debate, I think, Jim, is local governments need to prioritize. They need to identify wants versus needs. And I think that too much of what we're doing and what we're seeing across both of our states is local governments that want to spend on every want. I think that there's plenty of money in the current system to fund all of the needs and then some. But we haven't forced them to prioritize and make some decisions between those needs and those wants. So again, we demonstrate the problem, Jim. We showed kind of what the answer could be, and then it's sort of a learning curve for folks to realize, like, okay, the blank check has stopped. How do we still fund all of our priorities?
And I think you want to see me get on my soapbox.
Yes, let's do it.
and this is why truth in taxation was so important to get across the finish line in Nebraska is when I hear elected officials say, well, I didn't raise your property taxes because I kept the levy rate the same. Well, that's not what that's not how people pay their bills. They pay their bills in the amount of property taxes they're sending to cities, counties, and schools. And if that money is going up, then that's a property tax increase. It has nothing to do with the levy unless you're going to reduce it. My point being is that the problem, the frustration that I think people in Nebraska started figuring out, I don't care what you did with the levy rate. Did you collect more in property tax collections than you did last year? And if so, that means you're spending it. And they do this in a not very transparent way and then hide behind, don't look at me. I didn't raise your rate. And so that's why policies like the caps that you're talking about that address the spending are so critically important.
That's right, because taxes and spending are just two sides of the same coin, and frankly, the taxes are just a product of the spending. Um, and again, like you and I have talked about this sort of, off air many times before, but and I've seen you work on it. The dynamic of we didn't raise your property taxes, the assessor did, like that is just seventh grade algebra. That is all that is. And to your point, no one cares what the inputs are. They just care about how big that check is that they have to write every year or how much it's growing. And so again, find a way to put a cap around that, not to let there be an out, not to let the blame be passed to the assessor or anything else, but put some real strong bands around the tax and spend. And I think we're going to be okay. Jim, I don't follow along every community in Nebraska, okay? But what we've seen here is local officials who will yell that the sky is falling or it will be falling if we pass these things, and I don't know what we'll do, and we'll have mass layoffs and no pothole will be fixed and sewers will back up in the basements. The media picks up and runs with that narrative too. And yet, time after time in this state, when we've passed some sort of government reform and we were told the sky was going to fall, you would be surprised how quickly after that you hear about innovations or changes or collaborations that these local governments come up with, right? To some degree, you've got to put those bounds there and you've got to hold their feet to the fire. And once they no longer have that blank check, you would be surprised at what they're able to do, right? And so that's all of this is. Force them to innovate and change and figure it out like the rest of us have had to do for years.
I would imagine that your county associations opposed it, League of Municipalities opposed it. What other kind of groups were opposed to these reforms?
You're exactly right. I mean, the local governments themselves that would be funded by this, by property taxes, were against it. Quite honestly, there were a lot of legislators who, and again, bipartisan support in both chambers. I realize Nebraska has one chamber, but yeah, I think your listeners can follow along, right? So we had Democrats and Republicans in the Iowa House and the Iowa Senate who voted for it, which is good. I think they listened to the voters, but a lot of the heartburn along the way, or a lot of those groups that had to be overcome, were legislators themselves who were continuing to prioritize local government over their own voters. And in a weird dynamic, too many legislators maybe were fearful of their mayor. They were choosing to listen to one voice who was yelling very loudly over the voices of 70 or 80% of their constituents who wanted these things put in place. And that doesn't make a legislator a bad person, but they need to remember it's not like the single loudest voice that they hear. They need to listen to the collection of the voices the people actually vote for.
Yeah, what we see in Nebraska is that we have legislators that were either a county official before, they were a mayor before, but more importantly, or more commonly, I should say, they know their mayors and their county officials, and they don't want to necessarily go back to their communities and tell them, no, you're not going to spend more. We've got to prioritize the taxpayer.
That's exactly right. The flip side of that is they forget, as they were campaigning and door knocking, right, all summer and fall before, they heard endless pleas from their voters, their constituents, do something about my property taxes. But then they get to the Capitol and they hear that single voice of the mayor and they get a little weak-kneed about it. And they just need to remember that they're doing right by the taxpayer, by their voter, by their constituent. Keep going through and pass something sensible that can slow this down.
So talk about the process or the role that a think tank like Platte or your organization can play in reforms like this, Chris.
It was a year-round process, right? And actually, this one was a multi-year process to get this done and done well. But it starts with I think of sort of off-season, Jim, or out of session. Um, there's polling, right? There's collaboration with other colleagues across the country to see what has worked or what didn't, right? What have we seen our peers do in other states that really fell short or maybe missed the mark, right? So how can we kind of perfect the policy that's being presented? Um, there's there's a lot of boots in the ground work that's done by a think tank. And Jim, you know, you're pretty close to me when you're in Omaha. You get to Western Nebraska, right? That Nebraska is a big state, and I know that you guys travel it well and listen. And we do the same thing in Iowa. Literally, all four corners of our state, listening to people, hearing what their sort of pain points are, and talking about solutions. Because our legislature is made up of folks serving from all four of those corners too, right? And so it's about being out across the state, listening to people, promoting your ideas, making sure those ideas are reaching the legislators through their people. And then when it comes time for the session to begin, do you have a presence in the Capitol? Do you have a relationship with legislators, with key staff members, with the governor's team, right? With other influencers, making sure that the priorities that you've outlined, that maybe you've defined, that you maybe have been the champion for, the leader on, making sure those priorities or those voices that you're representing don't get drowned out in the rest of this. So again, this sort of big, and you've had enough of these victories to understand it. These big victories are multi-years and multifaceted. It's not simply about, somebody in the Capitol making a great pitch as they're giving testimony in a subcommittee or something. It's all the work all over.
Yeah, it's certainly a process, and sometimes things are incremental. It's about looking at and anticipating what objections are going to be. It's about best practices across the country. It's about individual relationships and storytelling. A lot goes into getting policy over the finish line, that's for sure. All right, let's talk about Governor Kim Reynolds' legacy. She is on her way out. She has done some significant things from a tax policy standpoint for the state of Iowa. What does this reform mean for her and her legacy?
I mean, I guess it's a great last act, right? This was the third property tax bill she signed. Quite honestly, I've lost count if she signed 3 or 4 income tax bills. To your point about this being a process and some of these things you have to come back to and keep improving. But I think it is just another thing that sort of cements her legacy. It also showed that she is the sort of governor who will use all of the levers or all of the powers of that office to get things done. The governor did a grassroots sort of town hall tour across the state last summer too. So, it's interesting. Governors have to lead, Jim. And again, you've seen this, you know this, but they've also got to do some of the work. They can't just sit in the governor's office, in the governor's mansion and issue decrees. They have to go out and they have to work too. And the governor is great about getting it across Iowa and connecting. And it just demonstrates again that when our governor has believed in something, she will get out and work on it. So whether that's income taxes, it's property taxes, it's school choice, she will get out there and work. She will talk to people. She will listen, and she will do all the things. She is not one that kind of hides in a bunker. For sure, she gets out there, and so we're thrilled to have partnered with her on kind of one last thing. We will miss her when she's gone, because she's not just signed her name on good bills the legislature has sent her over the years. She has been a champion and out front on a number of these issues too.
My guest today has been Chris Ingstad. Chris has done a fantastic job leading Iowans for Tax Relief, the foundation there, in achieving some pretty significant tax reform over the years. Chris, I enjoy these conversations, look forward to future conversations. At the end of the day, we want to leverage best practices between our states, Iowa and Nebraska. Tax policy matters from a competitive standpoint and a migration standpoint. So very appreciative of you taking time today and walking our listeners through what you guys accomplished this session. So thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Jim. We appreciate the platform to talk about it. And I always particularly appreciate working with you all, because while our states are unique, I think there's so many, commonalities between Iowa and Nebraska. So it's really helpful for us.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Chris, for joining us on Nebraskanomics. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you want more economic freedom in Nebraska, please visit platteinstitute.org to make a donation to help fund our research and advocacy. Or you can subscribe to our newsletter and learn about today's most important issues facing Nebraskans. It's time to stop the status quo. Let's remove economic barriers and make Nebraskans proud.